Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm with Ray. Ray, for everyone out there listening, can you please introduce yourself?
Okay, sure. Ray McGinnis. I'm talking to you from Vancouver, Canada, and I am the author of Writing the Sacred, a Psalm-Inspired Path for Appreciating and Writing Sacred Poetry back in 2005. So I have a long history of for about 20 years teaching memoir and journal writing and poetry workshops. And then more recently, I wrote Unanswered Questions, What the September 11th Families Asked, and the 9/11 Commission Ignored. And I would say that the thread between those two books is my interest in personal story and the power of story. And in this case, the power of the story of the families who lost loved ones on September 11th and their efforts, grassroots efforts to have their government investigate what happened.
I think with the 9/11 topic, it's very, very controversial. A lot of people tend to, it's like I said, it's when we say controversial, I mean, it gets linked in with some things like with conspiracies. Now, I told you off here, I did a 6-hour episode on 9/11, and through that, I learned a lot of things. And a lot of the questions that I have are probably a lot of the questions that you addressed in your book as well, too. And I'm very interested in learning a little bit about your book. For instance, what did you try? Because you did it a little bit differently than probably most 9/11 books. A lot of 9/11 books tend to focus on a specific angle or the exact events that happened, but you actually did kind of more of a focus on the personal experiences and also the stories that the people who lost loved ones in the 9/11 attacks are.
Yes, I was. I personally was on. I remember where I was on September 11th in Joshua Tree National Park in southeastern California, and I was the only person who was not an American citizen. As of 60 people in the room at this retreat setting, and there were two people in the room who had a financial advisor who worked in the Twin Towers. So it was very emotional for people in the room. So I remember that. And after a number of days, was finally able to take a bus across the border back to Canada because no planes were flying. So, the day was, very, seared in my memory. And so when I happened to pick up a book in around 2007 by Kristen Breitweiser called Wake Up Call, The Political Education of a 9/11 Widow, at least up in Canada, I was surprised that although I'd heard lots about 9/11, that I could go for 6 years following the news as responsibly as I thought I did, and not have heard anything about the family's efforts to have an investigation. Certainly, I wasn't familiar with any of the testimonies before the 9/11 Commission, their questions, their press releases, and so I began to catalog what I could. Went to their website, and and as the years rolled on, I realized there was very little out there that told the story about what happened September 11th and the aftermath from their angle. There's a lot of what I would call kind of political hardball books that kind of start from the beginning, like Jim Marr's book Inside Job, and you've got this thesis from the start regarding government complicity. But what I wanted to do was to tell the story of how the families got from grief to going to Washington, D.C. to lobby for an investigation. And also these people, there's 12 people on the family steering committee representing tens of thousands of families. And of those 12 people, the majority voted for President Bush in 2000. So the group of people that I was looking at and following their questions and their press releases during the life of the 9/11 Commission were people who were very, like they were expecting that the person that they voted for to do the right thing. And so it's only through the whole unfolding of the 9/11 Commission, all of the roadblocks and all of the ways that the commission goes off the rails and doesn't look into the questions that the families presented to the commission over 1,100 questions, sort of questions and subsections of questions to the commissioners. And the commissioners received those questions in March of 2003. And they said to the families, thank you very much, families. These are the questions we will use as a roadmap for our investigation. And yet at the end of the investigation, the families find 70% of the questions were not addressed at all, only 9% of the questions with any real rigor at all. And so that begins to be a catalyst for families wanting new investigations. So the government had all the goodwill in the world of these families, many of them Republican voters. And so it took a lot for the families to become more and more skeptical of what was going on with the investigation itself. So it's an interesting story. I mean, the surprise really is that the investigation was run in such a way that it didn't end up with the families standing beside the 9/11 commissioners saying, thank you, government, great job, we're really happy, democracy works, off you go. But instead, it's a story of growing frustration and disappointment. At the beginning, after 14 months of pressing President Bush to have an investigation, he says, okay, we'll do it. After Dick Cheney had said we can't afford to have an investigation, only give comfort to the terrorists, we don't have any money. And they decide to appoint Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger meets with the families, and they ask him some questions to make sure he doesn't have any conflicts of interest. And they mostly there's 12 people, 11 women and 1 man, who meet with Kissinger in his office. And as he's pouring coffee on the coffee table to the members of the families, Lori Van Auken asked, Dr. Kissinger, we just want to make sure you don't have any conflict of interest, that you don't have any clients by the name of bin Laden. And at that point, Kissinger spills the coffee around the table, falls halfway off the sofa, and resigns the next day. And because he did have clients by the name of bin Laden. So there's just lots of things regarding a proper investigation would involve appointing people that are at arm's length with whatever you're investigating. Even Tom Keene, who's replaces Kissinger as the chair, is involved in the Amarata Hess consortium, which is interested in having a pipeline built across Afghanistan. Lee Hamilton is the vice chair, and he is a long time, for many decades, best friend of both Dick Cheney and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. And Lee Hamilton has sort of conceded that over the years he has a penchant for not wanting to play hardball and doesn't go for the jugular, he says. So there's this, and throughout the life of the commission, the families want the commission to subpoena witnesses, and you've got 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats, and Hamilton, who's a Democrat, is always voting with the 5 Republicans not to subpoena yet another witness. And so you have this kind of pattern of really sabotaging what a proper investigation would be.
So I want to preface this with, I'm not like a conspiracy person when it comes to like there wasn't a plane that went into the, I'm not that type. I don't go that far. But whenever I talk about like the 9/11 subject, Flight 93, that got, if I say if there was like a shot down or shoot down type thing, I pull that from the information that was in Dick Cheney's biography, where he talked about giving an order to shoot a plane down. And this Secret Service person kept coming back in and going, are you sure the plane's only 100 miles? Because there was a plane flying over the White House that they were going to shoot down. And he kept giving this order to go shoot this plane down. And the guy kept running back in, sir, and he kept saying that the plane was getting closer and closer. He goes, I thought I told you to shoot it down already. That guy hesitated, and that airplane at the time flew over the White House, and it wasn't one that was being hijacked. So that person that was supposed to make that call hesitated. Who's to say that he didn't hesitate when whatever happened to Flight 93? But the issue with this is it's people's families. It's something that's a very, very sensitive subject for people that lose loved ones. And I go, there's a fine line between separating conspiracy and there's a fine line for just asking questions of what the hell happened. And when I bring this up is the fact that a week after the destruction at 9/11, that all that scrap metal, everything that was picked up from those buildings was being sold somewhere else. And there was families that were involved that were trying to get an investigation done in this, and they were raising concerns about this, but you didn't hear a lot of media attention about it. And I ended up learning this from people that were, taking notice of the events happening around that time period. And I go, now you can say that can be conspiracy, but that's a legit concern of why. And I'm just curious, when it comes to the family's unanswered questions, did their questions boil around things that people could be labeled as conspiracy, or did they rightfully have questions asked about very, very suspicious and very, very weird things going on with the 9/11 stuff?
I mean, the family's attitude. Um, Kristen Breitweiser, who lost her husband Ron in the South Tower. I mean, their approach initially, anyway, was to ask questions to fix the system, to find out who fell down on their job. The families I mean, when it comes to things like the taking away all the scrap metal. I mean, you've got the Bill Manning, the editor of Fire Engineering magazine, which is kind of the paper of record for the Fire Department of New York, criticizing the removal of all the debris and all the scrap from Ground Zero, reminding anyone who wants to hear that what you're supposed to do with an investigation is you're supposed to put the yellow tape around the area and then go and do the forensics. And so the way that things are being done is backwards, just on its face, leaving the whole government's official story in place. The response to the evacuation of the trade towers is a scandal for the families. So North Tower is struck at 8:46 a.m. CIA Director George Tenet is having a breakfast with former Senator of Oklahoma David Boren, and at 8:50 a.m., 4 minutes after the North Tower is struck, the CIA Director is on a phone call with headquarters in Langley. And in that phone call, maybe after he says, "How are you doing this morning? To have a good sleep?" He, is talking about what's happened minutes ago at the North Tower. And he expresses the opinion, he's 100% certain, that this plane flying into the North Tower represents a terrorist attack by Osama bin Laden. Okay, let's take him at his word. So the family's question is, if you, Mr. CIA Director, are absolutely certain that this is a terrorist attack, why have you not tasked somebody in the Langley headquarters to phone the Port Authority and tell them this is a terrorist attack, evacuate the buildings? But that doesn't happen. Instead, you have people that are apparently, if it can be believed, in the Port Authority, not seemingly watching television news reports. When people have their gut instinct from learning since kindergarten that when your school is on fire, in a school drill, you leave and go to the playground or the parking lot to be safe from being in the building that's on fire. You have people who have the instinct to get out of the building are going down the stairwells, being met with Port Authority officials who are saying with their bullhorns, "This is America. You are safe. Go back to your offices. Go back to your offices, or you will be fired." This is just not acceptable for the families. I mean, and the all of the kind of backwards instructions of what's going on. There were, of course, in 1993, there was the bombing in the North Tower. There were, I forget, between 56 people who were rescued by Brooklyn police helicopters on the rooftops. And the Port Authority had gotten permission from the city of New York to get certified heli spots for helicopters to land on both the north and south towers in case of an emergency. And September 11th is an emergency. And so on this day, you've got somebody's decided to lock the doors of the rooftops. Uh, the Port Authority tells the press, well, we're doing that because we were concerned that that if people got up on the rooftops, that they would commit suicide or they would damage expensive broadcasting equipment. I finally came. I mean, I didn't know what to do with that, but I finally came across an exhibit by someone in Amsterdam who had an exhibit of all of these photos of tourists who would go up on the rooftop of the South Tower from April of 1973 until September 10th, 2001. You've got at least 1,000 or more tourists going up onto the rooftop, the open air rooftop of the South Tower every day. And it's a revenue stream, $13 a ticket for the tourists to go up on the top. And the tourists are not, they're not being given like a mental health form to fill out to make sure they're not going to commit suicide. And so for the families to hear that, these kinds of excuses, it just doesn't make sense. So there are problems like that the families had with the behavior and the instincts of the also Mindy Kleinberg gave testimony. Her husband Alan died in the North Tower, and she talks about how the explanation that the government has had is that the hijackers had a lot of luck. And she talks about all the broken protocols. You've got people going through security. Over half the hijackers or more, I forget the exact number, 2/3 are stopped and given checks not once but twice. But luckily for them, no one thinks to look in their carry-on baggage. So there's just lots of problems with you've got protocols where established since 1958. In 1956, the Grand Canyon mid-air collision happened with a commercial jet and a military aircraft, and 128 people died. And there were several other incidents on the East Coast where commercial flights would hit each other in a cloud or whatever. And so by 1958, the government put in place the protocols that have been in place since then, which is to make sure that every plane that leaves the runway, before they leave the runway, the pilot knows what the approved flight path is. And if they go 2 miles off that approved flight path, that the jets will be scrambled to go and find out why that flight is off course. Whatever the reason, a sick pilot, malfunctioning equipment, thunderstorm, whatever, or very occasionally a hijacking, or maybe some drug smuggling, who knows. But the reason that they put that in place is 2 miles off course, and we're going to track you and take you to the nearest runway and sort things out, is because every plane flying in the air that's off course poses a real and present danger of crashing into any one of the other 4,000 to 7,000 planes that are up in the air at the same time. And so you've got a system in place where every other of the few times that there's been a hijacking, every other time, planes have been scrambled and they've been following them within 8 to 10 minutes. You have over 10 to 12,000 incidents where the General Accounting Office is receiving reports from the U.S. Air Force regarding the expenses of fuel and staff time to scramble jets. It's a taxpayer cost. And so they've got 10 to 12,000 times where they've seamlessly always been able to scramble jets and go up into the air, get the plane in question down to the nearest airport and check things out. But somehow, for the families, why is it that on September 11th they were 0 for 4? And so, there's that's just a question. What is going on that somehow this track record of batting 1,000, to use a baseball term, is suddenly fallen apart on this day. So,
well, before I ask, I want to ask you before I ask you this question. I've read the 893-page commission report. Um, there's a big thing in the first couple pages that say, in hindsight, this is all like we're looking back at an event, so it's not good to criticize, the information that we know now compared to the information that we had back then. And I go, yeah, but even with TSA, and there's like a lot of things that should have been flagged that just went through, there was like a large amount of things that you can start to question about. And I just bring it to the point of this. Do you think that like it's a conspiracy that the government was involved, like how it gets to like a lot of conspiracy people think? Or do you think that the real conclusion is they didn't do a lot to really avoid the scenario? I mean, they had Operation, I don't know if you know Operation Vigilant Guardian. That was happening the same day about a program simulation of a terroristic attack going into one of these towers. And it's like you have to program a simulation. Now, I talked to a skeptic about this, one of the guys that debunk stuff. And they mentioned, they're like, well, you got to understand, they've been getting threats about this for years. And it's like, all right, I'll give that weight. But I mean, all of this is very, very suspicious. And there's still a factor. I think it was just this last year alone, this last anniversary for it. The family members told Biden not to come there. Because they want to know what's left in those documents. And it's like you still have this gap, and a lot of people that are just, I mean, just they deserve questions. And then what happens is when you start talking like this, you start mentioning a lot of things like you were just doing a second ago, or I'm doing with Operation Vigilant Guardian. The people that choose to debunk it say you're hurting the families, you're not letting them heal from their pain. I'm like, well, that's not letting them heal from their pain, that's raising concerns. The issue that's not letting them heal from their pain is the fact that there's still questions that they deserve answers to, and they're not getting that. There's been a complete neglect. I mean, the most common examples I could give you would be closed door testimonies, very, very hush hush. I mean, we don't really have any of those happen now. So you have this aspect of like, what are they covering up? There's a lot of things. It can go into like the really, really crazy stuff that you could easily point to be like, there's definitely something that you can question. I think a lot of people bring it to like, it's a way for the government to surveil you or track you. I go, I know, I just think they were doing some dirty business and something happened or something slipped up. But the one thing I can't get over is the fact they seem to completely neglect the care and the things that they should be doing for family members and people that were, still dealing with the effects, either heartbreak or loss, that are going on today.
Well, I think that the questions the families are asking are, a question like about the, on the day of September 11th, you've got all of these, reports of as many as 8 planes in the air. Nobody knows whether or not there's going to be, another attack soon, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Sears Tower in the following days. There's all kinds of stuff, the anthrax, there's all this stuff's going on. And so the families ask, why, when none of them who are trying to get back to planning funerals now for their family members can fly anywhere, why is it that the only exception to who can't fly in American airspace are members of and relatives of the bin Laden family? And in terms of how the government, how the FBI agents deal with this, I mean, wouldn't, if you want to say, okay, we have to fly these bin Laden family members back to Saudi Arabia, wouldn't you at least want to interview them and ask if they know anything, in terms of maybe another attack? Well, no, apparently not. I mean, and there's lots of people who are working in different airports in Boston, other places, that were just outraged that this was the approach. And you have Richard Clarke, who's the czar or counterterrorism czar, who interestingly, in terms of different plans to take out bin Laden in the previous year, was when it's instrumentally involved in working with United Arab Emirates intelligence to prevent CIA plans to capture or kill bin Laden in the previous year. So, I mean, if that's Richard Clarke's approach to dealing with bin Laden, it seems he's the wrong person to counter terrorism. And also, he's asked by the 9/11 Commission, who told you to fly bin Laden family members out of the USA? And he says, well, somebody suggested that we do this, and I agreed that we would do it. And then The Hill magazine, a couple of months later, follows up and says, well, who exactly was it? And he says, well, actually, it was me. I was the person who told myself. that we would do this. So in front of in front of the 9/11 Commission, he's giving the impression when he says somebody told me, everybody listening thinks that means somebody else, not himself, not me, myself, and I. So there's this kind of continuous sending people off in opposite direction, away from the trail of. And I think that the families, I think that what they would say is regarding conspiracies, if there are conspiracies, it's the government's fault because the whole way that they conducted the investigation was not done in a way that you could find out what happened. They keep, Condoleezza Rice comes forward, other people. Commissioners have 5 minutes to ask questions. They're supposed to ask the toughest questions. Instead, they're saying nice hairdo. That's that.
What?
Or
I didn't hear
yeah,
about that.
yeah. Or Lee Hamilton's talking to Mayor Giuliani. He's an old Midwesterner himself. Like, I mean, this is not the time to yuck it up and talk about whether or not you also like Reuben sandwiches. I mean, and this is the kind of thing that happens sometimes with the banter, with the. I mean, it's. I can understand if you've got an hour with me, you could ask me a few questions and maybe kind of icebreakers. But when you've got only 5 minutes, you're supposed to barrel down and ask the most important questions. And often the commissioners would waste their time. And also you have people who are not under oath that can just prevaricate and avoid for 5 minutes, and then their time is up. So a lot of the way that and you also have the families are constantly seeing the unfolding lack of rigor in the softball questions over and over again by the commissioners, and going before the press or going up to the commissioners saying, these are the questions you now need to ask, bring this person back in. And there was very little follow-up. So the whole way that the commission was conducted it's not a template for how you would ever want to do any investigation in America in the future for anything, if you wanted to get to the bottom of what happened. And I think that for the families, their question to people who are critical about conspiracies would say, how many coincidences do you need before you're just a coincidence theorist? I mean, how many, there are, I forget what, 5, 12 different, of these special war game exercises just happen to all be moved to the morning of 9/11. It just piles up. And so it left the families, instead of answering all their questions, it began to galvanize people wanting to have a new investigation. So I think that with the families regarding Joe Biden, back in 2020, Trump's Attorney General William Barr is also part of the Justice Department, the FBI. They're all State Department are doing everything they can to prevent the families from having a lawsuit against Saudi Arabia. Many of the families think that Saudi Arabia is complicit in the attacks. And yet the government has stonewalled and prevented for 2 decades any effort to have a day in court with Saudi Arabia. William Barr says because it would hurt government state secrets and harm American national security. And the families are saying, how can our going to court against Saudi Arabia harm American national security? How can it harm? What government state secrets in America would it harm
That's
by
the
our
crazy
asking?
stuff. That's the crazy stuff is like when they say that, it's like you expect us to trust you. Like, really, I don't mind. Like, I get it if there's like stuff you can't say when it comes to things, but also I just think you would probably get farther at this point if you just were honest about it. Because everyone already thinks it. A lot of people think you're already involved in some shady government stuff, probably overseas and dealing with this. Now, how connected you are to the 9/11 thing, I think that's some very, very crucial information. And it's just the answers that they give, even with asking softball questions. I find that a lot with a lot of stuff. Like JFK is the similar kind of thing. And I'm not trying to link these two together, but I'm just saying the media, like there's no incentive for them to ask hard-hitting questions like you would see if a person wasn't so connected, like the government. You're reaching out to officials, but it's like, did you guys, like, even when I see Pelosi, or whenever not Nancy Pelosi, what is her name? Psaki, even when I saw her answering questions, she'd call him the same person that she knew she could easily take down. It would be a snippet or a soundbite saying Psaki bomb or whatever you want to say. I was like, ask another reporter that's there. Don't just ask the one that you're easily going to keep hitting down and hitting down and hitting down.
Yeah. I mean, like with the families that the family steering committee itself, I got 12 people. And I would say at this point, I mean, a couple of people on the family steering committee now have my book. Uh, I would say that, I mean, one of them died in a small plane crash in 2009, Beverly Eckert. But the rest of them, I would say about half of them, uh, you know, 6 or 7 of them at least, would really like a new investigation. Probably 3 or 4 are satisfied with the government's explanations. So, I mean, the matter of even in this family group, the families are not all of one mind, and I had to describe that in my book. The families that have decided, uh, perhaps for pragmatic reasons, we've gone through so much, it's really heartrending to have to testify, and the government has decided, this is our 9/11 Commission report, and they've decided, I've put so much into of this in my life, I need to move on, and this is what they've said. Okay, fine. Some are doing it enthusiastically, some reluctantly, but they decide, okay, I'm going to give the government the benefit of the doubt. And then other families are just saying, it's just not good enough. For Bob McIlvaine, whose son, his family was featured in the Atlantic September big article, and his son Bobby Jr. Was one of the first people in the morgue the morning of September 11th. Officially, if you read the New York Times, obituary, he died in the 106th floor. But he didn't. I mean, he was found, outside the entrance to the tower. He did not suffer the kind of injuries that you would suffer if you jumped for 106 or 105 floors. His body was intact, but he suffered, well, what seemed to be the events from being blown out of the building from explosives. And so, the question is there. And I mean, I read through the, I came to this. I mean, I'm, political science background. I'm not going to just accept things that are off message or off the record, holus bolus, just because it's not what the government says. So, but I found out that the fire department had interviewed 503 first responders that went into the buildings on the morning of September 11th. And so I read through those. It took me 16 and a half months to read one firefighter's testimony a day. And 118 of them described being, describe what they say, explosives, bombs, secondary devices going off. I think that the 9/11 Commission, I mean, often you also have FBI present with the firefighters speaking to their superiors about this. So the 9/11 Commission knew about this testimony, but they didn't seem to bring, hardly any firefighter in to ask them anything about what happened. And they ignored the testimonies, the written testimonies. I would say, I think that if you have 118 firefighters, nobody was asked, but 118 firefighters volunteer that there were bombs going off in the building. It's something you should at least look into, with a new investigation. I mean, if somebody can put together an argument to say, actually there was a massive security failure, and actually Al-Qaeda had people masquerading as caterers, taking grenades inside of giant chocolate cakes up to the world and the windows in the world. I mean, I don't care. But I think that the choice by the government to just ignore it entirely, when you've got all these firefighters that know that there were, and you've got 343 of them who died that day, it just leaves the silence is deafening. And I've talked to first responders that it just eats them up, that this never got looked into, wherever it leads. I mean, for the families, they wanted a real solid investigation to go wherever it leads. If it involves complicity of Saudi Arabia, if it involves complicity with United Arab Emirates or Kuwait or Pakistan, If there are some treasonous people, officials working with foreign governments who are in the United States itself, who are within the government or private or whatever, like they're just saying, look into it. But instead, what you have is a government that runs an investigation, which from the very beginning, before they start, Philip Zelikow, the executive director, together with another senior counsel, puts together an outline with the chapter headings and the subheadings of what the report will show. And so when you decide what the narrative, what the story of what you will find in your investigation will be before you start to do the investigation, that also raises a lot of red flags for the families.
What like keeps their fire going to one another investigation being done? Like I understand you can't reach out to like a private investigation or something like that because you need to be connected to the government to probably get access to a lot of the information that they have. I mean, did anybody in an interview or any military personnel say something different than what the official narrative was that kept it going? I understand like losing loved ones is something that definitely keeps the fuel going, but I mean 56 we're 50 something not 50 something years we're a good 20 years past that event. And I mean a lot of people will tell you I remember exactly where I was on that day of it. So I mean the fire's there, but I just wondered, has anybody in like that past 20 years in an interview or a slip up or something? I know there were talks of like diesel fuel under one of the towers as well too. I never dug that deep into that. That seemed like a little bit of a conspiracy thing to me, but from some people you can talk to, it's 100% truth to them.
Well, I think that if you have 118 firefighters telling their superior, I mean,
That
you got to believe
explosives are going off. That's
explosives.
insane.
Yeah, I mean, you could. I mean, it's no short. I mean, it's about 10 to 12,000 pages of text. So it's no small thing to go through all of that material, and
Well, it's how we handle risk as well, too. I mean, after that happened, what a lot of government did, they shelled out a bunch of money to reinforce a lot of these buildings with an extra 6 inches of concrete, thinking that would stop a jetliner. Like, there's a lot of things that were like, even though they say like we don't have the money or we don't have the funding to do this, there's a lot of areas where you're like, well, you did that though with money. Like, I'm just curious why you didn't do the other
yeah,
thing.
yeah. Yeah, I think a proper investigation. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the families think probably it's maybe a slim hope at this point, a grand jury, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I don't know, but you had people like whistleblowers like Sibel Edmonds, I think, who said that the government knew the date of the attacks, the method, planes, and the locations, the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, ahead of time. Well, you know, you want to have someone like that. I mean, she testified, but then nothing that she said went into the report. Now, of course, someone like that, if they had a chance at a second really transparent investigation, would be grilled by people that cross-examine her and question her and try and discredit her, and other people that try and defend her and give her account. It's just that all kinds of whistleblowers are coming forward, telling the families, we've called the 9/11 Commission offices. We're not getting any phone calls back. I work with the CIA. I work with the FBI. I work with FAA, and they're not getting phone calls back. They're being ignored. And so they're begging the families, bring us in and try and shame the commissioners into having an interview with us. I mean, that's not the way an investigation is supposed to happen. And you're not supposed to have also when somebody does come forward as a witness, even often in behind closed doors, private testimony, they're having a kind of a government mind or someone who's a higher up in their department who's now sitting beside them or standing with their hand on their shoulder. And if the person starts to say something that person, the minder doesn't want them to say, then they kind of kick their foot or squeeze their shoulder or answer the question that the commissioners have asked the witness to ask instead, and won't let the witness answer the question. I mean, that's not when you do that kind of thing and that kind of intimidation, you don't get a report where people tell what they know. You get a report where people know not to say what they know.
When we talk about a second investigation or a truth and reconciliation, would it would the families be up for a aspect of amnesty or maybe forgiveness of all wrongdoings when it comes to just wanting to know what the truth is?
I I think that there probably would be a range of responses. There'd be some that just want to have like there's something healing about being told what really is the case. I mean, a lot of families are just at a place that whatever the government has told us, it just doesn't add up. And so, I mean, the whole thing around this surprise attack, but yet you've got, I mean, Paul O'Neill is the Treasury Secretary for Bush. He writes in his book, Price of Loyalty, that item number one in the first cabinet meeting in January of 2001, President Bush is signaling, saying to the cabinet, you know, find me a way to get into Iraq. I want to finish what my dad started in 1991. You know, I mean, were there people in the room who said, okay, let's find out if there are people that want to do evil things toward America, and let's sit on our bums and not do anything, or worse, you know, why did the president, if it's a surprise attack, sign a memorandum days before 9/11 to go to war in Afghanistan? I mean, maybe there are understandable or explanations for all these things, but if the story is we were blindsided, nobody could have known, it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up when nobody could have known regarding planes hitting building, when you have myriad war game manuals with bin Laden on the front of the manual and planes aiming at the Twin Towers, you know, months and even a couple of years before. So were there people in the Pentagon that expected bin Laden to attack the Twin Towers? It's just, you want to ask these questions, but these are the questions that aren't asked.
Well,
It just leaves the.
even when they sent the Bin Laden family on that airplane, it was so quick where it was like it seemed like it was already the plan was the first thing in motion right after that attack happened as well. So now the way that they've said it was that they didn't want them to be objects of mere curiosity or something, that there was some type of collusion attached to them. And the way that they say it is like Bin Laden was a bad seed and he was a black sheep of the family. We had no connections with them, but it was just like, yeah, but you're not being true. Like this is all coming out in small messaging throughout time. It's not coming out in one giant thing like it should. Like people want to hear all this stuff out, but you're seeing this all get delayed and slowly trickle out over a process of 20 years. I mean, all the documentaries that kind of dig into the deep questions or the things that are things that you should be questioning get labeled conspiracy, but then you get news broadcasters that are just tossing softball questions out there. I mean, did you ask any of the family members about how did they feel afterwards when it came to the idea of like merchandise and sales and how it immediately became a product? Like people had American flags for months outside of their homes. Every single house had an American flag, and they were selling Twin Tower shirts. They were selling up like Remember and all this type of stuff. Did you ever ask them about that? I always thought that was weird.
What I do know is, I mean, there's families who are involved with the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, others who will not go near the place. Um, and one of the particular places of controversy for them is the whole gift shop and some of the things that are sold in the gift shop. For some of the families, it's just not a place to be really selling a lot of these little trinkets. I forget, you know, what they are. I mean, they could be, you know, like, I don't know, 9/11 waffle plates. I don't know, but just, you know, like little teddy bears, and you know, I mean, it's it's just, yeah. I mean, for the families, anything which is, you know, kind of the Colonel Tom Parker approach to to making some money somehow off of other people's tragedy, and grief is just not on. And I think, again, like, you know, for me, uh, I had to, you know, it would have been different if I'd written a book about the 9/11 truth movement. Then I could have written, you know, here's some allegations about government complicity, American government complicity, and here are the chapters, and here's why. But because I'm writing about families that are Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and many who were hoping that the president they voted for would do the right thing. And because they're not all on the same page afterwards, some that support the official account, others that just want to forget about it, others that want a new investigation. I'm at a place where I just say that the investigation that happened was not done the way you would ever want any investigation to be done. It was a cover up. What all is being covered up is left for people to speculate, which is why we have conspiracies. But then again, the word conspiracy does mean whenever two or more are getting together to do something criminal. And the first conspiracy after September 11th was the government's explanation that 19 hijackers plus bin Laden plus the 20th plus Omar Sheikh plus KSM, et cetera, all planned to do this. So I think that a proper investigation would not avoid looking at if there are any holes in the government's story. Karl Rove was referred to by I think Jim Lehman on the 9/11 Commission, and he called Karl Rove the quarterback for the commission. He was often calling Philip Zelikow the executive director, and there was a great concern throughout the life of the commission that the commission's report would not make any conclusions that would embarrass the president or hurt his reelection chances. And those are not the concerns that should be part of what the report is going to find. So, so I think that there's, whether people, want to believe the government's official account or not, the way the commission was run is not run in a way that you would ever want to have an investigation for something as serious as this, or even less serious.
Well, a successful investigation has an end to it. It doesn't just keep on going and be this thing that's been lingering on for 20 years. I'm curious, did your perspective of did you have these thoughts before you decided to interview the families and talk to the families, or did this all slowly develop as you started diving deeper into the topic? Like you said, the families were kind of like different ones, had different sides. Some people, believe this and some people believe that. Did you have any that were like the red dot, red pin cushion people that had like the maps on the walls and everything, where they kind of showed you everything that what you would call, I'm not going to say conspiracy, I'm going to say fantasy stuff, the crazy stuff that's out there, things you can question, things you should question, in my opinion, but just for the general public that doesn't, they don't buy any of that stuff, which is insane because the evidence is clear. There's things like you just labeled before that you can easily say that this wasn't done properly, this wasn't this. But I feel like the general public just wants to drop the topic in general. Did you awaken to a lot of this from interviewing those families? Did you come across a lot of this information doing your own deep dives, or?
Well, when I'm talking to first responders who lost colleagues on 9/11, and they're telling me that they know that there were explosions in the buildings, I'm just trying to think, like, if I was a juror, if this ever went to court, and I heard 118 first responders who were firefighters on rescuing people on 9/11 testify before the court that there were explosions, and I would believe that there were explosions. I'd want to know what then can explain why there were explosions in the building, who planted them. But I wouldn't want to ignore that very disturbing aspect to what happened that day, which hasn't been looked into. I think that the families, there are families that's that are all over the map in terms of what they think, but I think that they do. There are families that think that the Bush administration was complicit. There are some that think that, Patty Casaza, whose husband John died in the North Tower, has said that she thinks that the terrorists, the 9/11 hijackers were patsies. I know, like Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy with the JFK assassination. So in that way, then you would have people who were maybe coached and cajoled or excited about getting on planes. Maybe they were told that something else was going to happen. I have no, it's something that would need to be just looked into. But you know, you have just curious things. The hijackers, 15 of them coming from Saudi Arabia. You have the CIA office next door to the U.S. Embassy. You have hijackers filling out forms for their applications, for their visas. You have the CIA, kind of overruling the diligence of State Department or embassy officials. And so you end up having people being allowed to come into America when they write down, what year were you born? 1878. Where will you be staying? Left blank. Occupation, left blank. What will you plan to do? I mean, if all of these visa forms are incomplete, in some cases almost completely incomplete. Some cases because people don't even speak any English. Normally, the track record for the Saudi the U.S. Embassy in Jeddah is that if someone doesn't fill out their form and complete it, they don't get to be flown over to America. So again, is it just a coincidence that you happen to have all these hijackers that can't fill out complete forms, and yet they're fast tracked to the USA? So the question for some fans would be, I mean, what were there people in the U.S. government working with, in cahoots with them? I mean, we have in the past, there's a word called quisling, where there were people in Norway who were working with the German Nazis to undermine the Norwegian defenses. So for some families, whether or not it's a big thing in terms of the Bush White House, but were there some people in American government in some positions that were that didn't have the best interests, that weren't upholding their oath of office to defend the nation, who were working with the enemy in kind of that language? So, I mean, again, let a proper investigation, were it to ever happen, go in whatever direction it needs to go to follow the leads wherever they may. I mean, my interest in writing the book was to get people to think about the family's experience and to understand why it is still left as a very unsettling, unresolved matter 20 years later, when it should, if the investigation had properly been done, have been wrapped up and people could move on. And that's the tragedy, the double tragedy.
We were doing this same thing that Oliver Stone did at the ending of his film, where he talked about the number of records that are still kept about JFK's assassination. And I think a lot of the general public doesn't know these things. Like a lot of information that you've listed off, I don't think a lot of the people are too aware of. There's a couple new things for me as well, too. And I think that sparks up not really controversy, but sparks up curiosity of like, yeah, why don't we have a proper thing be done? Why isn't there another investigation that should be thoroughly looked through? I mean, whether that's giving pardons to people that might be involved. I mean, I have no clue. I mean, you don't want it to end up like the JFK topic where it's been 50 something years there and there's still divisiveness and sides getting chosen on each one. I mean, at this point, it's just kind of like you need your credibility built back, because I think the area of distrust since like 1963 when Kennedy was shot, trust in the government has fallen to just dramatically over time, has just decreased.
And I think that, Patty, let's see, Mindy Kleinberg and Lori Van Auken met with Vermont reporter Charlotte Dennett in 2009, I think. And the widows told her that they felt that, half jokingly, they were still suffering from, I think, political betrayal syndrome. And they described, and have more recently described, what happened with the 9/11 Commission as political theater. So for American citizens and for citizens around the world, when an event like this happens, and when the response of the government is to run an investigation in such a way that they don't look under most of the rocks that they should look under, and create a kind of political theater to get the right sound bites. Although for the most part, the 9/11 Commission wasn't really reported. You didn't normally have very much. It wasn't like, I remember Watergate, and it was kind of like, every day you could watch, hours of testimony. Well, this was not a front row seat thing. And it took me to write this book to even finally see any of the, to get to know who Mary Fetchett is, or Mindy Kleinberg or Monica Gabrielle. These are names that should be household names in America. But because of the lack of media exposure, these people are, have their riveting, courageous effort, which was described by the 9/11 Commission co-chairs as the best example of grassroots democracy and citizen advocacy in many decades. And yet most people don't know this story.
It's very interesting how that's not being reported on. Is there any questions that you have left, even after writing the book? Or obviously, you have a lot of questions when it comes to information that we don't know. But is there just from diving into the subject, did you face a lot of criticism as well too?
Uh, the book's been very well received. I think a lot of people find that I've written it in a fairly even-handed way. In my conclusion, I think I do recommend that in the best of all possible worlds, there would be some kind of a new investigation, to give peace and healing and transparency and accountability finally for the families. But I leave it to the readers to draw their own conclusion about what they think. And I think also I would say that the families who are dissenting, who want a new investigation, don't want to do what the 9/11 Commission did from the start. The 9/11 Commission, in writing up its outline of what the commission's narrative would be for the report that they would release a year later, they don't want to prejudge what, if there was a new investigation, what that investigation would find. They just simply want people to do a proper job. And so in the same way, I think because, I've just scratched the surface. Like in my book, I cover like 12 different questions the families asked out of their many hundreds, even over 1,000, 1,100 questions. And so there's always more to learn. And it's like a huge, I remember at Christmas having like a 1,000-piece puzzle with my cousins. It would take us, 10 days to get it done with all of our eager excitement because there was just so many pieces. And the 9/11 story is like 50,000-piece puzzle. So I think that there would be things that I will still be learning. Even recently, I reading again through some of their questions and some of their press releases, I learned that not only were there not that many, there were 18 days of 12 public hearings, that as the commission rolled on, the commission was canceling more hearings that had been scheduled that were now taken off the calendar. So I think that it's a story that it's a big story because it's a stunning introduction to the 21st century. It's affected the whole surveillance.
I don't know how you chose 12 questions. How did you pick that out?
Well, I picked some of the questions that there was the most that I could find. Like I would go and try and search things on Google and see, and also Paul Thompson's book, The Terror Timeline. I would look and see if I could. He refers to different articles. Can I now find the article in the Washington Post? Is it still available for me to read? So, I needed to write about questions that I could find the most material to write a story about the question, or to write about what the families knew, because I knew that the families asked the questions because they'd read thousands of news stories because they couldn't sleep at night, so they'd read all these stories and then have these big binders initially of to support why they wanted these questions asked. So I think that I've scratched the surface, but I guess my invitation is that other people that would read my book can be curious, and then to say to themselves, okay, I'm going to go to the Family Steering Committee's website, which is is listed in my book, and I'm going to go and so I have a website, my own website, unansweredquestions.ca, like California, and people can go to the Family Steering Committee website and they can look at the family's questions and say, well, is there a question here that I would like to know more about? I think it's too big a story to just blow off. We need to we need to consider it and to not be to not allow ourselves to be credulous or to allow ourselves to be too quickly reassured by statements of government officials who often we find have a track record of not being very truthful about many other things too.
Well, Ray, I really appreciate you giving me your time to do the podcast. Is there a place where people can find your book and any other links that you have too?
Oh, sure. So my website is unansweredquestions.ca. I have a list of over 80 resources with links to books and videos and news articles. You can find my book on Amazon if you want an ebook on Amazon, as well. It's on in paperback on Amazon. On Barnes and Noble, it's hardcover and paperback, and any local bookstore you like to support.
I'll make sure I link it all in the description. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.